On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk a little bit about how the common public is dealing with cybersecurity, the ethics of microdot tracking, and we have a great guest, Ramesh Balan from Exablox, to talk storage. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 246, recorded June 30th, 2017. A storage drive to rule them all. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech. The show is dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host for today, Louis Maresca, your guide to the enterprise. But, you know, this world is pretty large, and so is the enterprise. And I'm going to need probably another professional in this world, and he's going to be my co-host in crime. Mr. Brian Chi, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu. Chibert, I hear you're having some PC problems, maybe that your PC might have needed a little bit of Starbucks to wake up?
Yes, I have discovered just how expensive a cup of coffee really can be. It was just a tiny little dribble on the trackpad on my MacBook Pro that kind of got into the spacebar and so forth, but it managed to short out a lot of stuff. And unfortunately, even though I was covered by AppleCare, it is not covered by the old AppleCare, which, oh, by the way, at the Worldwide Developer Conference this past couple months, there was an announcement that Apple made about AppleCare Plus. I believe it's about 30% more than the old AppleCare, but it now covers things like accidents, like coffee. So that might be kind of interesting. So maybe my next Apple product, I'll go get AppleCare Plus. Even though this is the first time in my entire career I've managed to accidentally drop some coffee or drink on my device. I have purposely done it so we can, as a service video, to determine what kinds of damage coffee can do, or Coke and things like that. But this is the first time I've actually self-inflicted myself. Darn.
Well, you're a lot less clumsier than I, because I break devices pretty much every quarter. But anyways, Microsoft doesn't worry about that. But anyways, so let's get into the show. You know, just the two of us today, but we do have some great topics to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about storage and backup, and we have a great guest to do that. But first, like we always do, let's kick it off with the blips. From science fiction to fantasy writers and futurists alike, we've always strived to really make artificial intelligence more like the human brain. The holy grail of AI is building a powerful computer that doesn't need to be programmed. It just learns from things that you do. From AI, it surveils and it recognizes and it can converse, but it can do other things too. Well, in order to mimic the power of our own cognitive capacities, some believe you have to know how the brain works first. Richard Feynman put it, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." Reverse engineering, in a way, is what was kind of required to essentially understand what's going on. Carver Mead correctly predicted that our present-day computers would use tens of millions of times more energy for a single instruction than the brain uses for a synaptic activation. In comparison, supercomputers of today, our brains don't actually use the amount of megawatts that these things use. Instead, they use just oxygen, nutrients, and consume the power of the classic light bulb. How does it use such low energy? Well, today's computers, although having powerful cores, they process long queues of tasks sequentially, while the brain computationally units is neurons, and they're connected in a more highly parallel manner. Parallelism allows us to use energy we need instead of just all the background tasks that are running, using extra energy that we don't actually need to use. Kabinea Bohem, a research group at Stanford, unveiled its low-power NeuroGrid chip in 2014, and Qualcomm has announced that its Braininspired Zeroth processor will reach the market in 2018. IBM's True North made up a silicon neuron out of tiny cores that communicate directly with one another using synaptic-like connections, recently moving from digital prototype to usable product. Instead of more processors, they will be just smarter. What True North is proving is that the strict fidelity with how the brain works doesn't seem to be required. maybe Darwin had something with this whole evolution thing.
Well, it seems wireless options are being rolled out for very hard-to-reach rural locations. In what I'm calling a move, AT&T is now starting to roll out fixed wireless service for hard-to-reach rural locations that have not been able to get DSL or cable modem service previously. Launched in Georgia last April, it is now also available in Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, the Carolinas, Tennessee, and Louisiana, with plans of being in 18 states this year. It's offered as internet only for $60 a month with a 1-year contract or $70 a month without, bundled with DirecTV for $50 a month with a 1-year contract or $60 a month without. And customers will also need to pay a $99 installation fee for all options. My guess is that AT&T is able to play this game because they only need to provision the cell tower configuration in a single tower and not have to make allowances for roaming between the towers. This gives them the ability to support a larger number of subscribers and is most likely how they can offer download speeds up to 10 megabits per second and up to 160 gig per month for those rates. Not spectacular, but this may open the door to future IoT provisioning for farmers to get sensors into their fields more economically and is sure as heck cheaper than having to pay the last mile cost of privately installing your own poles or conduits like you had to do in the past. So definitely a step in the right direction that hopefully other providers will follow.
So AI and machine learning today always have done better with raw power and distributed processing backing it, right? Well, the gathering data on local systems and using sensors and then kind of passing it off to the distributed computing in order to process it makes sense. Or does it really need that? Well, for instance, Amazon, Apple's Siri, Microsoft's Cortana, and IBM's Watson seem to work that way. Well, what if you're not connected? Well, team in Microsoft research field it's time to overcome the connected limitations of AI. Manik Varma and Ofer Dekel's team have found a way to compress a neural network down from 32 bits to a single bit and run them on a $10 Raspberry Pi. What, you say? Well, if you think about it, if you're alone in the middle of nowhere, that's when, and you have no connectivity, that's when you sometimes need your AI implant the most. Shrinking the AI models down will work well for both sensor-based tasks, for instance, to learn by location or intention, or even recent actions and the device data. But what they don't make sense for is things like potentially curing cancer. Microsoft has also talked about a lot of the grown intelligent edge strategy where it's brings all AI-capable microprocessors closer to the user. Varma, who's actually visually impaired, the research is a little bit more personal. His team is already developing a prototype, an intelligent walking stick in order to showcase the research. For the maker like in me, this is actually added to my top of my project list coming forward. If you want to try out the Raspberry Pi-sized machine learning and training algorithms, they're on GitHub, where they can actually be deployed to a Raspberry Pi 3 and to a Raspberry Pi Zero.
Well, the 32 terabytes of Windows 10 source code leaked may not be quite as bad as we first thought. In an article by Mary Jo Foley on CNET, she points out that the code was part of the Microsoft shared source kit, which has been made available to OEMs, partners in certain governments, and qualified customers for debugging and reference purposes, which basically means this source code has been available outside of Microsoft for months or years. Of course, only time will tell if this source code in the wild will yield a flurry of malware, but this doesn't quite sound like the sky is falling yet.
So Kate Wagner, a 23-year-old writer and student in Maryland this past week, received a surprising cease and desist letter from Zillow, the real estate media company, demanding that she stop using Zillow content. How is she using it? Well, Kate was the curator of the popular architecture criticism website called Mansion Hell, where she actually critiqued the architectural styles of buildings and structures, but she used some of the photos from Zillow. Zillow disputes Wagner's understanding of fair use and said that in addition to violating Zillow's terms of use, she was actually infringing on the rights of the copyright holder of the image. Why is Zillow so darn sensitive about this? Well, last week a judge partially overturned a verdict in which Zillow was ordered to pay $8.3 million in damages for copyright violation related to 28,000 images provided by the VHT Incorporation on the Zillow Digs website. Well, Kate wasn't going to let let it go without a fight. After temporarily shutting down her blog, she reached out and got the backing of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. EFF staff attorney Daniel Nazar sent a nice letter that said, "Our client has no obligation to and thus will not comply with Zillow's demands. Zillow's legal threats are not supported and plainly seek to interfere with protected speech." Zillow decided to actually back down and posted this week they don't look to pursue legal action and that it wasn't their intent to cause Kate to shut down her passionate blog. Another win for free speech, but think about it. Who do you think is the real winner here?
Well, there's a class action lawsuit against Anthem for a record-breaking breach that may be settled for $115 million. Anthem, the largest health insurance company in the United States, has agreed to settle a class action lawsuit over a 2015 data breach for a record $115 million. The settlement still has to be approved by the U.S. District Court Judge Lucy Koh, who is scheduled to hear the case on August 17th in San Jose, California. And Anthem isn't admitting any wrongdoing or that, quote, any individuals were harmed as a result of the cyber attack. My spin on this is the money is supposed to be used to provide credit reporting support to those affected, similarly to what the U.S. Federal Office of Personnel Management has done for federal employees. However, in my opinion, as a person affected by the OPM breach, I'm really hoping the credit monitoring service this time is on shore and that it's better managed than what OPM weekly offered to federal workers.
So this past week, Google actually had a wake-up call from the EU, fining Google over $2.4 billion for anti-competitive practices relating to its shopping service. Well, why? Well, it seems Google has been favoring itself over the other product providers in the shopping space. Along with this claim, Google also has to deal with other investigations by the EU, including one around Android dealing with what apps and services are included on a specific build of Android. Relaunched in 2012, Google Shopping is a fight against the growing trend of online retailers, even over Amazon's dominant space today. What Google's real fear in these claims are at the heart of it is the opposition to courts claiming global jurisdiction. It poses the risk of an end to its policy of divide and rule. What the EU has shown is that the consortium of 28 countries can be big enough that companies have to sit up and pay attention. This is just the beginning. Well, folks, that does it for the blips, but we're on to the bites right away. And this one's actually pretty interesting. Is your password 123456? Well, last year, after a bunch of data breaches and dumped passwords, researchers found that this is one of the most widely used of the passwords in the country. And a recent study done by Pew Research found that almost 64% of Americans have had personal data breaches of some kind. 41% encountered credit card fraud. 35% have compromised account numbers. 16% have had their email taken over. And 15% have received notices of their social security number being compromised. And then actually, which is interesting enough, 14% of those have had loans taken out in their name. And 6% of people have had their names and information impersonated to file false tax returns. I don't know who would want to do that, but it's a growing trend of cyber threats. And in fact, 49% of Americans feel that their personal information is a lot less secure and safe than it was 5 years ago. But there's always another camp of thought. And in this case, 18% of people believe that their information is now even more secure than it was 5 years ago. And 31% feel it's actually just as safe. Is it? Is it just as safe? Well, let's take a step back and talk about passwords. We've said that 123456 was a common password, but some of the other contenders include 123456789 and maybe all ones, or the word QWERTY, or even the word password. These are all kind of the top of the 10 here. I think fans of the hackers back in 1995 would be happy about this list. But Chibert, why aren't people learning? What's going on?
I don't know. Password vaults are anywhere from free. There's some pretty decent free ones out there. I actually use a commercial one that synchronizes to an encrypted database so that I can use it across multiple devices. But there seems to be a real pushback. A lot of the professors that I work with, they still don't like it, even though the password vault will actually paste it into the web page for them, they still refuse to use it. And JJ to the 4884 in the chat room is totally correct. Convenience over security. So what is it going to take? What's it going to take? Are we finally, what do you people think it will take to get people to finally start using multi-factor authentication, to finally actually use strong passwords? I hate to say it, maybe these hackers are doing us a service. Maybe the shock factor is finally going to get the general public to use strong passwords, because it's not that hard. I mean, really, the Raspberry Pi hack that's out now, that's going around, that will take over your Raspberry Pi to do cryptocurrency mining, it requires that you have the default password, default user. So I don't know. This drives me crazy. I agree with JJ. It's going to take a huge breach. It's going to take something, but I still don't know what it's going to take. I keep screaming into the ether. I actually just did a news story on one of our local TV stations just the other day, and I said, the basic call to arms: just change your password. Use your favorite poem, use your favorite song, use your favorite book. Just say the second letter from each of the words and use that as your password. Go 10 words in. It's not that hard. So yeah, Loquacious, I agree. Human beings are inherently lazy, and I guess it's going to take someone to go and really smack the general public with a huge breach to get people to finally start doing something. Or maybe it's not going to happen till the next generation.
Yeah, I think that JJ4 actually has a good point. They also said, hey, convenience over security, right? And I think that's a big problem. I think that, and I'm actually, I have this problem myself. I've set up old accounts in the past where, maybe they were just for, some gaming service or some online thing where I'm like, you know what, this is not important. I'll just set up some simple password that I'll remember. It's not, it's not an important service. Then this way I don't have to kind of put it in my key vault and really deal with it later. And so if I ever pop onto the site, I'll just use it. But, sometimes those services can be potentially used against you in a way for, like you said, even sometimes multi-factor authentication. So it almost makes sense to kind of go back and reconcile all those. But I think that's another thing, is I want to kind of throw that out to you, Cheaper, is, people have in a growing amount of services that they use. And, people say, hey, don't use the same password for everything. And, unless you're using a key vault to store all of this information for you so you don't forget them, sometimes people tend to use simpler passwords to secure these things and things that they remember, or even sometimes using the same password like they say not to do. So, what's a way to do that? What's a way to handle it for the common user, even to go back and reconcile some of the services they signed up for that they don't even remember?
Yeah, I use a key vault, but when I'm lazy, I actually really and truly love Touch ID on my iPhone. Being able to log in with a fingerprint's pretty awesome. I do like the cartoon of this guy, the girlfriend's trying all his fingers while he's sleeping to unlock his phone, finally gives up. And the guy finally wakes up and he uses one of his toes to unlock his phone. I think that's a pretty cool way of doing things. I like biometrics. I really do. Not having to remember even a past phrase is kind of cool. But then again, you see the science fiction about, the bad guys cutting off your finger. Obviously, that's an issue.
Yeah, I think that definitely biometrics is the way to go. But again, they still see. I think this could be an idea for a startup. Is some way for someone to go back and reconcile all of your accounts and find a way to maybe randomize their passwords and then keep a catalog of them, and then secure them by biometrics. I mean, honestly, there's so many things. I can have old email addresses and old even accounts, like for instance my previous house had I'm sure that my accounts for the water account could be a very simple password. And I think, these types of things, consumers are going to need to start taking more seriously, and they're going to have to start securing things better. Otherwise, they're going to continue to have a problem.
Yeah.
But I think we've beaten that one to death. Let's move on to the next bite. So this one is a little bit more interesting. It's a lot about the NSA, and even when we think about printing, do you think about when somebody else prints something, and if somebody's watching or being able to know what you're printing? Well, contractor realty Leah Winner in August, Georgia, thought that she was safe when she printed something out, and she leaked top secret classified NSA reports and information to the press. Well, how did they find out? Well, a secret code weaved through the actual printouts of themselves. With careful examination of the documents, experts found that there were tiny yellow dots, almost not visible to the naked eye, coded and repeated throughout the document. What were they saying? Well, they showed the date and time the document was printed and the serial number of the printer, helping narrow down the original person who printed it out. Microdots have actually been well known for a while, and security researchers know that it's existed for many years, but does your printer have them? Well, the Electronic Frontier Foundation keeps a nice list of printers that actually use them, and they're in the wild. They're actually out there still. And well, why are they being used? Well, most people can actually see if the copies are the originals or even they're forgeries. But what about secret messages? Well, stenography has been around for a long time. Even back in World War II, German spies in Mexico found that they had taped tiny dots inside of an envelope concealing a memo for contacts in Lisbon. Today, companies like Alphadot in UK sell little vials of permanent adhesive full of pinhead-sized dots, which are covered in microscopic text containing a unique serial number. This sounds like something out of a Tom Clancy novel, doesn't it, Cheebert? I mean, is it something that potentially businesses should be doing?
There's certainly a lot of people that are complaining about it, but the vast majority of people don't care. I'm actually an ex-Xeroid, and Xerox printers have had this for a long time, so has HP and all the big popular ones. I personally think that with the intellectual property leak problem that a lot of organizations have, I think this is something that might be a good thing. It's kind of like having serial numbers. If you turn it around a little bit, in fact, a lot of the new color copiers have the ability. The European Union has put in what is called the Eurostar constellation, tiny microdots, onto all their currency. And the cool thing is, if you try to copy them on a color printer, most color printers have the ability to detect that Eurostar constellation, and will actually error out. It will not allow you to color photocopy currency, which is a pretty darn good thing if you ask me. Yeah, I think I kind of like this. Being able to track a document, it comes to mind like, Clancy, we mentioned Tom Clancy. Clancy actually had his key character, Jack Ryan, create a thing called a smoking word processor, where he, for limited release top secret documents, he would change the way the document was worded, especially the nice tasty little tidbits, so that if it did leak to the press, the tidbits would be so good that you're tempted to quote them. And then they would know which copy actually got leaked. So reality lay winner, I'm sorry, you got tripped up by technology. And personally, I think this should be something that's in all color printers.
So that's interesting. I like to kind of throw another spin on it. So like, I do agree that, businesses especially should be using it because it's their printers and their paper and their information. So if somebody is printing out their information, they should know who did it. Right. Even now, some companies, like for instance, I know Google, when you walk up to a printer, you got to swipe your badge. They know what you're printing, that kind of thing. And so it makes sense. But I think one thing I want to kind of throw back at you is, what do you think? Is this ethical for companies to kind of force this type of thing on even consumers without really allowing them to shut it off? Because it is part of the firmware of the printer, and it is your printer. So why should you have to deal with this kind of showing up in your printers if you don't want it to be there? What do you think, Cheever?
It's a tough one. The ACLU obviously would, those kinds of people would love to have it be a opt-in only type of thing. But then again, I'd love to have it on. It's very unintrusive. It doesn't doesn't really mess up your documents any. And having the serial number on there means, maybe, ransom, if someone gets, printed something out, that's kind of cool. As Pyre, I don't know. That certainly is an interesting concept. Can we do the same thing in grayscale images? I don't see why not. Especially with the resolution, that a lot of modern printers are in excess of 600 dots per inch, and some are up at 1200 now. And you can certainly put a nice, interesting pattern. And see, the dots aren't really intrusive because they're spread out. The encoding is based upon the position and the distance from each other within a matrix. So you can actually encode quite a bit of information in a small amount of space and still not be intrusive. So I guess I'm going to lean towards, I think this should be on, and I don't think it should be something that could be turned off. Because I think someday it's going to make a really, really big difference for someone. I think this is a good tool for law enforcement.
Right. We'll have to see how it kind of plays out. Well, that does it for that bite, but we do have another interesting bite. And Shebert, I think this is some new technology coming out in the field, and you want to talk about it.
Hey, Tim, I hear you've just introduced some significant changes to TotalView since we last talked to you on episode 240. Can you tell us a little bit about the bombshell you dropped on the folks at Cisco Live?
Yeah, so one of the things we recognized is that we have the largest data set of all of the different companies for troubleshooting. Error counters, performance information, QoS queuing information, interface configuration, all of that information back in one data set. And we figured, what's the next thing? So the next thing would be to be able to make that data set accessible to anybody inside the organization with a plain English query. So what we've introduced at Cisco Live earlier this week is what's called natural language troubleshooting. What that means is you can type in a query and say, what happened between San Francisco and New York at 4:35 p.m.? It will analyze the network, find out what happened earlier in the day at that point in time, and be able to come up with plain English resolutions like, between San Francisco and New York, you were dropping 6% of the packets due to a QoS issue on the Edge MPLS router. So it comes up with plain English resolutions that match that plain English query. And so what this means is anybody can do troubleshooting, and you can also do this troubleshooting effectively right in front of the user. And this was something I was frustrated with for years, is a user would come up and say, hey, what happened? And I'd say, well, I'd have to research and I'll get back to you maybe in a couple of hours, maybe in a couple of days, I can find out what's going on. And I just figured that's not the way to operate. If you knew what your network was doing, you could solve that problem and get the issue resolved. Now you can do it
this is
right
almost
in front of the user.
So this is right. So this is a great extension of like your network RXs that you have, network prescriptions, where it's telling you the problem in natural language. Now you can go and ask the question in natural language, right?
Exactly. And really, everyone's moving in this direction. You have Google, you can do natural language queries against Google. You can do natural language queries against a lot of different applications to get data out of it. And we figured this was a normal, natural extension in the troubleshooting world because people need to troubleshoot problems faster. And if you had a natural language input and a natural language output, you're just going to get problems solved a lot faster.
Great. Well, you mentioned Google. What about Amazon?
So yes, you're going to be able to use Amazon Echo Dot to be able to communicate to TotalView. So you'd be able to end up asking questions like this, where let's say you said Alex Dot, if you renamed your device, ask TotalView what happened between San Francisco and New York, and it would respond with, at 4:36 p.m., the San Francisco core switch, interface 12, dropped 16% of its packets due to a cabling fault. That way, you never even have to touch a keyboard, and you can get the relevant information analyzed as to what happened on the network to get the problem solved. And we just figured this is going to be the next stage of troubleshooting, is make it even easier than where it has been for really the past couple of decades of having to dig and troll through statistics and counters and try and find out what's going on. That's all eliminated now.
So I do understand one little detail for the people listening. You are going to have to name your switches something that makes sense, and you're going to have to name your ports something that makes sense, right?
Yeah, and so that's expected. If you have a switch that is named AT5932, you're going to end up having the device end up saying, hey, AT5932 interface number 16 was dropping packets due to a cabling fault or a QoS issue. You have to make sure that you can make sense of that. And so having your devices named appropriately so that you can immediately interpret and understand that is going to be appropriate.
And so SNMP, the MIBs have been changing. You know, everybody thinks that SNMP has been around, it's been around, but SNMP is getting richer. There's more things you can do. There's more CPUs in these devices so they can leverage more information. And this is sounding like you're actually harvesting some of these changes in SNMP and taking advantage of the richer MIBs.
That's our entire game, is that if we can tap the information in an automated fashion, you don't have to go download MIBs. You don't have to determine, gee, does my device support these MIBs, and go out and try and query the information. And then when you find out, gee, yeah, it supports the MIB, but it only supports 3 OIDs, and you're digging at information, that's really not what your job is as a network professional. Your job is solve problems faster, get business architecture deployed, do strategic things that benefit the organization. And trying to troll through MIBs is something we see as really shouldn't happen anymore. Developers, companies like us, we should be doing that sort of work in an environment that automates all of that so that you can get problems solved. And you're not having to build a solution and saying, gee, it took me 6 weeks, but I finally got the right MIBs to pull certain pieces of data out of certain devices and do some sort of analysis of it. That's not really where network engineering should be. Networking engineering should be focused on building that next generation network, on designing and architecting that next generation network. The interrogation of what's going on these devices should be completely automated. And that's our entire game, is do that automation so that you can end up acting upon the information and resolving problems.
Oh, very cool. Well, you know, ladies and gentlemen, you know, welcome to the Next Generation Network with Tim Titus, the CTO of Path Solutions. And Tim, where can they go for more information?
So you can go to our website, www.pathsolutions.com. There's effectively a link down towards the news that might not show up here, but it's going to be available where you can go read about the natural language troubleshooting and how this is going to work. We're going to have a video that also goes through that and shows you a little bit of that capability. Now, this is not something that's available immediately. This is coming in our September release. We're doing the QA on this right now, and I got to tell you, it's really cool to be able to talk to the network and find out what's going on. So the QA testing is something that we're spending a lot of time on because this has to be done right. But it is really cool. It is really neat. I can't hold back my enthusiasm about this just by how cool it is. But it's the sort of thing that I figure you're going to want to play with yourself. But it is coming in September to customers who already have a support contract. So if you buy before September, you end up getting it for free. After September, though, it is going to be something that we charge for. So when that is released, it is going to be a separate module.
Oh, it sounds like I've actually got an excuse to go and buy an Amazon Echo. Oh, I wonder how I'm going to get that past my fiscal officer. Okay, well, anyway, Tim, thank you very much. And this is Twyett.
Thanks, Chief. I appreciate it. And thanks to Tim as well. It's some really cool technologies there. And I do agree that automation is the way to reduce a lot of issues in an organization. So some cool stuff going on there. But let's get to my favorite part of the show. It's time to bring in the guest to drop some knowledge on the Twyett Riot. And this guest is no exception. Welcome, Ramesh Balan. He's the VP of Engineering from Exablox at StorageCraft. Ramesh, welcome to the show. You're actually in studio. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your role?
Yes, hey, great to be here, Lou. Yes, I'm the VP of Engineering at Exablox. We got acquired by StorageCraft in January. and I manage all of the engineering activities for the Exablock storage appliance.
Great. Yeah. Welcome to the show. Why don't you tell a little bit to the audience a little bit about, how kind of Exablox and StorageCraft kind of have almost complementary technologies, how they, what does Exablox do and how they kind of complement each other?
Sure. So for a lot of the viewers, they already know that StorageCraft has been a leader in the backup space. There are certain differentiation that they bring in, which is leading edge in terms of reducing the backup window, doing only incremental backups forever, as well as providing cloud services where if you have an on-premise failure, you can immediately boot up your VM on the StorageCraft cloud or Amazon cloud and get immediate availability, right? So StorageCraft has been well known in business continuity segments, right? And Exablox has been a pioneer in building scale-out storage appliances with cloud management and with enterprise storage features, right? Like data reduction, data deduplication, continuous snapshotting, and features like that, right? So with this marriage, I think it provides a complete end-to-end data management for customers that we can offer on protecting their data and also serving out the data and having the data be available at all times.
Right. One thing interesting about Exablox is maybe you can explain a little bit about, how is it actually different from some of the more traditional storage solutions like NAS and so on, and how is it kind of related? I think Exablox talks a lot about object storage and so on. How does it kind of differ?
Yeah, if you look at traditional storage, right, where we have come from, about 20 years ago, it was all about LUNs and LUN management and volumes, and you have a single server that is connected to the storage. And then you had SAN storage where you have fiber channel and you can connect a lot of servers, but still each server is kind of isolated and in a silo, right? The problem that we are solving at Exablox is the data is growing and it's exploding for everyone, right? So how do I scale out my data in a easy to use fashion, right? You shouldn't need to be a storage PhD to solve, to handle your data explosion, right? So as the data grows, as one of your boxes gets full, you buy another box, plug it into the same subnet. And we have a lot of automated services that recognizes other nodes in the cluster, automatically registers it, and immediately you see a capacity increase and you see a performance increase, right? So all of that done without a lot of high touch and with a lot of services running on the systems to detect that other systems have come into play, right? And in addition to that, you also get a lot of the management flexibility. You can manage the clusters from anywhere, from any device, right? So we were pioneers in bringing cloud management to storage. A lot of other folks have now followed us into the space where you get alerts, you get a lot of telemetry data and warnings and things like that to say exactly how your clusters are doing. And proactively, we contact customers if your drives get full or if you have a network issue. So it enables a whole swath of information at your fingertips. So that's kind of our main. Those are the main differentiators from the legacy storage vendors.
So I think one question I had before we get to some of the other stuff is, there are some other storage companies that do object storage today, and that most of these are accessible using RESTful or SOAP technologies. How does Exablox kind of differ from those?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Lou. We leverage object storage in a way that's pretty unique. So at the underneath the storage layer, as the files come in, we break it up all into objects. And that allows us great flexibility in building a true scale-out peer-to-peer cluster where we have content addressability and immutability of the objects, which gives various features, right? But at the same time, the vast amount of applications in the world are still running on file systems, right? They're not talking REST API. They're not talking SOAP yet. So we also want to serve, all those customers out there using file systems, but provide the, scale out and provide the flexibility of object storage. So we export NFS and SMB protocols, but then on the storage side, we store them as objects. So that's kind of the unique value proposition that we offer of connecting file systems to objects.
So, Ramesh, a lot of people are interested. When we start moving from a file system-based, arrangement to objects, is it really going to matter? Should we go all flash? I notice you guys have some all flash solutions, or can we manage our investments? Say, do a little bit of solid state and then have the bulk of it on spinning disk so that we can keep our investments from going crazy. Let's talk about that on the scale out statement you just made.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chibert. I think the object storage allows you to tier data in fine granularity, right? So you could apply policies in terms of, least recently used objects or the files that are really important to you, you want to keep on the flash. So it allows you to seamlessly have a tiered storage where, you have some of these SATA, SAS, or even NVMe, which has like sub-millisecond latency, right? And then you have hard drives, which have, 40 to 50 millisecond latency. And then when you go to the cloud, you have like half a second latency, right, or more. For users who are generating a lot of data, where there's an explosion of data, you want to kind of manage all of that seamlessly. And you really want computers to do the job for you. You don't really want to have a lot of time being burnt by administrators who have 1,000 other things to do in managing that data, right? So that's what the file system interface and the object interface lets you do, is to have policies and have tiering of data between all of these latency tiers, right? So that's one of the opportunities that this kind of an architecture creates for you.
So let's go and ask the obvious follow-up. Are we kind of starting to get into is our storage solutions appearing faster than the operating systems can catch up? I've seen some of these conversations around Windows operating systems, but is the open source world actually catching up and being able to use these types of advanced storage technologies yet?
There are open source systems, Chibert, that does some of these things, right? So there is solutions for clustering and object storage, but still, it requires a lot of administration. It is not, it is not built for ease of use. You pretty much still need a PhD to set up the cluster. What happens if I lose a drive, right? What happens if I lose my boot drive? There is a lot of CLI commands that you need to run to make that whole again, right? So how do I fit for the customer whose needs are evolving? How do I fit all of that in a seamless fashion is what is still lacking in a lot of the open source solutions, and that's a challenge that we are addressing.
So Ramesh, you kind of touched on this just a little bit, but I'm always curious. Like, you talk about drive failures and failures of drives. How are you protecting against drive failures? Is it a 3-way disk replication? How does that work with this system?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lou. So there are a number of things we do to protect against disk failures. Again, hard drives and SSDs, they fail in very different ways, right? There have been a number of studies done. So hard drives typically, they suffer from a lot of infant mortality, and SSDs, they generally have some kind of read disturbance errors and block errors, right? So to address all of these failures, it's very important for us to protect data for the customer. That's our number one That's our number one goal. In terms of failure protection, we have various failure domains, so that if one drive fails or if two drives fail, the file system data, you still don't lose the data. And we can tolerate up to 2 node failures in a cluster. We distribute the data in such a way that we can tolerate up to 2 disk failures or 2 node failures. And in addition to that, for SSDs, we also implement block level parity, because if you read the Google study on the SSDs, what you will see is while the SSD failure rate is lower when compared to HDDs, their Uber rate, the uncorrectable bit error rate, is actually higher than the hard drive, right? So it's almost imperative that in software we maintain the parity bits, so that even if I get a read disturbance and I get read errors, I can reconstruct from the parity bits, so that we can actually support the drive lifetimes for 4 years, 5 years under continuous operations with the number of drive writes per day specified for the SSD, right? So we implement a lot of these kind of technologies. We have scrubbing, continuous scrubbing of the data, make sure that the bit rot doesn't corrupt your data. And since we are also object-based, we actually take a SHA-1 checksum of the data. And so that object ID itself corresponds with the data on the disk. So that actually adds another layer of protection, where when I'm reading and writing, I'm checksumming the data, and I'm actually comparing that to the object ID that I'm generating at the upper level. So there's various levels of data protection schemes that we implement, which is needed to handle the drive failures.
Well, Ramesh, speaking of data protection and so forth, I'm sure we've got a bunch of viewers that are in healthcare, and JJ and some of the others actually starting to ask, what about HIPAA regulations? What can you do to make sure that the healthcare industry isn't accidentally releasing personal information?
Yeah, what generally vendors do in this kind of a space, and Exablox also does that, and is provide encryption, right? Encryption of storage with a key and a passphrase known only to the customer. And there are also other things that we need to do in terms of providing, if you're replicating your data, making that secure and encrypted across the wire, not just on disk. And also compliance, right? If I'm supposed to keep the data for 7 years, making sure there are controls that there are no spoof attacks, or there are no attacks on the threat vectors of the system, where admins can come in and change the data under you, right? So there are a whole host of encryption and passphrase management techniques that we use to, provide that HIPAA kind of regulation. There are more things that we need to do, but encryption and compliance management are big pieces of that.
So Ramesh, one thing you'd kind of touched on in the beginning is you talked a little bit about how your systems is a little bit more unique, because now you do supply kind of this unified approach to storage, but you also supply a cloud service as well called One System. Can you talk a little about what One System kind of does for an organization?
Sure, Lou. One System provides data storage management, right? So if you go back 20 years ago, the management systems of storage was living in the storage itself, or it was living somewhere locally in the data center. But we are now coming to a world where everybody is connected to anywhere. So the flexibility of knowing your cluster state, right? And if you actually look at it, there are a lot of services that are on the cloud, and a lot of open source tools on the cloud that can analyze your telemetry data that all of these boxes are exporting, right? So things like Elasticsearch and things like Cassandra, a lot of these tools are available where we can actually provide a rich set of analytics in terms of, like examples, right? Who accessed your file when, who deleted the file, right? And who touched the file last. Those kind of data, as well as things like what was my data reduction, yesterday? What was my data reduction over the month? And how has my space grown? Can we do some trending, right? So there are all sorts of capabilities that you can do by managing the storage from the cloud. Obviously, when you manage storage from the cloud, you need to have a very secure solution, right? This is very high security, and it's very important for our customers, right? So they don't want to expose all of this to the cloud. So we take a lot of protection in making sure there is end-to-end protection. We use HTTPS. We use digital certificates for the devices that talks to one system to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks. So we do a regular audit of the traffic between the cloud and storage. So there's a lot of security mechanisms that needs to be in place for customers to be comfortable using the cloud. But the cloud kind of opens up in terms of analytics. You can really see from a single pane of glass, you can see where your data is, how the data movement is being done, all the way from the local device to the cloud, right? So that it just enables that whole view of storage.
Very nice. Well, I'm going to toss you a question from the chat room. This one comes from Cursed1. He's asking about data migration. Eventually storage type X will become obsolete and the data will need to be migrated to storage type Y. What kinds of facilities do you folks have to make sure that I never lose access to my data no matter what product I'm on?
Yeah, that's a good question by Kirst. One of the things that we provide is standard protocols, right? So you have standard NFS and SMB, which are both standard protocols. So you can migrate your data while still having access, right? And within a cluster, you rebalance the data and you still get access. And, we are all going to the multi-cloud world where, you may want to back up your data or back up your VMs to, either the StorageCraft cloud or Amazon, and you can boot up your VMs from there, right? So it's all about being able to access your data wherever it is and being able to migrate the data and providing the freedom for a lot of customers. But because that's exactly right. What's true today, for example, even if you take the drive sizes, right? A couple of years ago, 6 terabyte drives was the biggest drive capacity. Now in the market, you have 12 terabyte drives. So if I buy a machine with 12 terabyte drives, I should be able to migrate to that without losing access. And that's kind of what object storage combined with cloud services provides you, that kind of a continuity of access, right? And that's a problem that we have to solve because systems keep evolving every year or two, right? So that's kind of a requirement for us.
So, Ramesh, one question I did have is, we've talked a lot about the technology and how the service works. One thing I did want to ask is, around kind of the barrier of entry, how does an organization kind of get started using OneBlocks, and where do they go? How do they get set up, and how easy is it?
Yeah, typically what customers do is they buy one of our OneBlocks devices. They plug it into the Ethernet. They plug the power supply. They turn on, and within 5 minutes, you have a file system available, right? You have a share available. You can drag and drop from Windows or Macs or Linux through NFS. It's as simple as that, right? And then let's say you run out of space in that, you buy another node, if they're on the same subnet, we will auto discover now these nodes are formed, and the capacity will scale out and the performance will scale out. And all of this happens without interruption to applications, right? So you can be doing your backups or you can do file serving, and you buy another node, you plug it in, and all you see is the expansion of capacity and scale and performance. So the name resolution and all of that is we kind of make it seamless so that the application doesn't get interrupted while you are expanding your capacity.
You know, Ramesh, I gotta ask. In your LinkedIn profile, you list Exablox as working on disruptive technologies. Come on, what do you guys mean by that? You know, let's take a look. What does your crystal ball tell us that the industry is going to be asking for next?
Sure, Chibert. You know, where the industry is going is, you know, the ease of data management, right? Right now, there are too many silos in the world. You know, you have flash for certain applications, you have hard drives for certain applications. You know, not all data is created equal, and customers spend a lot of time managing their data, right? So the whole, the StorageCraft solution, you know, where the vision is and where we want to go is to take that complexity out of data management, right? And give back some of the time to the system admins. And, you know, we should be able to classify, you know, what VMs you're backing up. You should be able to classify the data. We should be able to, you know, provide access patterns and have these kind of tiering, right? And seamlessly manage it so that, but while still providing protections within, you know, a department's company has, right? So that's kind of what we are working towards, and we feel that will add a lot of you know, advantage and you know, provide an ease of management that is not there right now. You know, using heuristics, using analytics, you know, managing your data end to end. Right? Tell me how many copies of data there are. Tell me where the data is, right? Computers should be able to figure all this out, and that's a path we are on, right?
That's great. Some great insights. Thanks. Well, folks, you've done it again. You've used up another hour of the best dang enterprise tech show according to 9 out of 10 objects in a storage pool. I do want to thank our guests for dropping some knowledge on the Twilight Riot. Ramesh, you are with Exablock as the VP of Engineering, and you're one of the visionaries there that brings kind of the products to market. Can you tell our audience where they can find you, where they can find Exablock, where they can find and read up on storage solutions?
Yeah, you can definitely go to our StorageCraft website, storagecraft.com, where all the business continuity solutions are listed. And you can always find us on Twitter at StorageCraft, or just give us a call.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ramesh, for joining us and giving us your knowledge, the Twilight Riot. It was a really pleasure having you. We'll definitely have to have you come back and see if some of your insights were right.
Oh, good talking to you, Lou and Chibert.
Thanks so much. Of course, folks, I have to also thank my co-host in crime, who's also our tireless producer of This Week in Enterprise Tech, Chibert, who is also getting over the case of the blues with his coffee-logged computer. Chibert, can you tell the folks at home where they can find you, your work, and maybe some other stuff that you're working on?
Well, I'll tell you, first and foremost, I need to do a shout out to Jock, my buddy Jock, the PR person for Exablox. I don't know what it was about June 30th, but this was a really, really tough date to get a guest. Ramesh, thank you so much for coming. Jock, thank you so much for helping out. Folks, help me out. You know, we've had some amazing guests on in the past, and people like JJ and so forth and HiWeb have tossed me some great ideas. By the way, HiWeb, I am actually working through the morass that is your corporate PR to try and get some of the new AT&T IoT people on. That's going to be a real challenge. But I am at ADVNETLAB on Twitter, and I would love to hear from you, and I would love to hear some show ideas. A producer, you know, after a while you start running out of ideas. Well, come on, throw me a bone. Help me out. I'd love to see what you think should be on This Week in Enterprise Technology. JJ and HiWeb certainly have done their part. Toss me some ideas. Come on. I dare you.
I just can't believe that Chibert has run out of ideas, but I definitely supply him with some of your ideas and check him out on Twitter and throw him a bone. Well, folks, also I want to thank you. Thank you for tuning in each week, week after week. we couldn't do the show without you. And if you want to keep going on this enterprise goodness, we need your support. We want you to subscribe. We want to make it easier for you to get the enterprise information that you want each and every week. So go out right now to the show page, twit.tv/Twyet. There you find all of our back issues, all of our back episodes, as well as all the full show notes and links, names of our guests. More importantly, next to the videos over there, there's that magic button, the subscribe to format of your choice, whether it's audio, video, HD video, and a device of your choice, phone, tablet, laptop, desktop. Also, don't be afraid. Share Twyet with your friends and family. We want them to subscribe and check it out. That's how we get supported here. And don't forget, you can also find me on twitter.com/LouMM, where you can check out all the cool things that I'm working on, both on the Microsoft Graph, graph.microsoft.io, and all of some of the neat work that I'm doing. But I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially Leo and Lisa, who allowed us to do this show week after week and have supported us, as well as to all the engineers, also to our super producer, Cheebert, and, of course, our TD, Kevin, the man himself. Kevin, you got a camera on yourself? Can you tell the folks at home what you actually do at Twit?
Hi. I take care of myself and the guests sometimes, including.
I see how it is.
I also
you take care of yourself.
I also take care of my coffee, which I don't spill on any computers.
Well, that's good. At least we can have some saved computers there. Well, folks, thank you so much for coming and for watching. And until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep Twyet.